Good evening. My name is Fiona Sweet. I'm the CEO and Creative Director of Stella. Thank you for joining us today to celebrate the 6 shortlisted titles for the 2025 Stella Prize. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which this event is taking place. And acknowledge any First Nations people with us here today, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Stella acknowledges the First Peoples as the first artists, the first storytellers, the first communities and the first creators of culture, and the traditional owners and elders whose stories and experiences are at the heart of the lands on which we live and work. Founded in 2012, Stella has ignited a movement, one that reshapes the literary landscape and reclaims space for voices too often overlooked. The annual Stella Prize stands as both a celebration and a declaration, championing the excellence of Australian women and non-binary writers. Through this prize, we honour their stories and affirm their rightful place at the heart of our national culture. Thank you so much to the Wheeler Centre for hosting our 2025 Stella Prize shortlist event. And I'd also like to extend a special thank you to our principal partner, Quest Apartments and Hotels. Their hotels, from Orange to Perth and Warrnambool to Brisbane, offer exceptional stays around the country. Quest has been a fantastic home away from home for all our Stella writers this year. A heartfelt thank you to Mecca, who have supported us for the past 3 years. As Australia's leading cosmetics retailer, Mecca is committed to driving meaningful progress towards gender equality, a mission that aligns wholeheartedly with Stella's values. We are also grateful to the Copyright Agency and its philanthropic arm, the Cultural Fund, which supports our judges and long-listed writers by providing funding for both and for prize money for all the 12 long-listed writers. To the State Library of Victoria, our home and a vital partner in connecting us to Melbourne's thriving literary community. Thank you for your continued support. Finally, I'd like to thank our long-standing and generous foundation partners, including the Maclean Foundation, the Koshland Innovation Fund, and the many individual donors who allow us to continue our vital work of championing Australia's women's writing. So, the most brilliant part of my job is where I have the honour of reading the annual 12 long-listed books. I'll now provide a summary of the judges' report of our 12 incredible 2025 long-listed books. A Language of Limbs by Dylan Hardcastle, Pan Macmillan. This is a love story that braids 2 lives, or 2 limbs, over many decades. This novel is an exquisite thing, burning with desire. Always Will Be by Michaela Saunders, UQP. Saunders has created a collection of stories that mirrors its characters, thrumming with life. The Burrow by Melanie Cheng, text. The Burrow creates a feeling of false security in its pages. It is not until days after finishing Cheng's work that you realise, with panic, that you've been afraid the whole time. Peripathetic by Cher Tan, New South. Funny and strange and breathing so fast, Peripathetic is a remarkable work. Tan has produced an utterly unique entry in Australian letters. Black Convicts by Santilla Chingapai published by Simon & Schuster. Black Convicts represents a substantial intervention in our understanding of the convict archive and offers a new understanding of Australia's participation in slavery since colonisation. Black Witness by Amy Maguire, UQP. Maguire's debut non-fiction is a must-read for all engaged citizens, especially journalists who want to represent the fullness of contemporary Australia. Translations by Jumana Abdul, Penguin. Jumana Abdul's glistening debut novel, Translations, challenges every assumption a reader may hold. Cactus Pear for My Beloved by Sama Sabawi. Penguin. Cactus Pear for My Beloved swells larger than the bounds of individual memory. How does love triumph over a wall? A character asks Sama's father. Stories like this surely form part of the answer. The Thinning by Inga Simpson. Hachette. The Thinning is an electric and melancholic tale, disturbingly believable but ultimately and surprisingly hopeful. Nag Mountain by Banisha Ajali Giramondo. An incantatory debut collection, Manisha Anjali's Nag Mountain takes its shape in the brilliant language of dreams. Theory and Practice by Michelle de Kretser. Text. In her refusal to write a novel that reads like a novel, de Kretser instead gives her reader a sharp examination of the complex pleasures and costs of living. Rapture by Emily Maguire, Allen and Unwin. Rapture stands out as a thought-provoking exploration of resilience and the possibilities contained within the human body. So that's the 12 long listers. And I would now like to introduce our hosts for this evening's event, Inala Cooper and Elizabeth McCarthy.
Good to be with you.
Inala Cooper is a Yawuru woman of the Kimberley with Irish and German heritage. She has a Bachelor of Arts and a Master of Human Rights Law and is currently the Director of Murab Barak at the University of Melbourne. With over 15 years' experience in higher education, Inala has presented papers at a range of international conferences, including the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education and the Native American and Indigenous Studies Association. And in 2022 was the President of the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Higher Education Consortium. Inala is a regular contributor on the ABC News Breakfast and The Drum, and at the Writers' Festivals including Queenscliff Literary Festival, Sorrento Writers' Festival and the Adelaide Writers' Week. Welcome, Inala.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good to be here.
Elizabeth McCarthy. Elizabeth McCarthy is the Program Director of the Queenscliff Literary Festival. She previously worked for many years as a radio producer, presenter and mentor in the community radio and at the ABC. She's been a sessional advisor to RMIT University media students and science communication students at the University of Melbourne. Her book reviews can be heard on ABC Radio, and she has been a judge for the Stella Prize in 2021 and a convener for the VPLA's, Victorian Premier's Literary Awards, in 2019 and 2025. She regularly chairs events at Melbourne Writers' Festival, Sydney Writers' Festival and the Wheeler Centre. She previously worked as a music reviewer and spent her formative years as a swamp punk drummer. Welcome.
Thanks, Fiona.
So that's it for me. Before we hear from our wonderful hosts, just want to remind everyone to stay on after to enjoy drinks, purchase books. There'll also be some book signings. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Fiona. Well, here we are, Elizabeth.
Here we are.
Yes.
Doing one of my favourite things in the world, talking about books.
And me.
It's just so lovely to be invited here by Stella and to be taken care of by the Wheeler Centre team. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, today's an exciting day because we've found out among the amazing 12 the shortlisted 6.
We have. So we're not doing like a super reveal because if you've kept your eyes on the media today, you would have seen that super reveal. But if you haven't seen the media today, then why not just be in a state of suspense for the next 50 minutes or so with Inala and I while we do our big reveal. So
Absolutely.
We should get things underway, I guess. With the first one, we're going to discuss the first of the shortlist. I'll hand it over to you, Inala, to announce that one.
Well, I am absolutely thrilled to announce that the first in the shortlist for this year's Stella Prize is Black Convicts by Stella Chingape. Big round of applause. What an absolutely vital book. And let's have a look at the screen and we're going to see a short video.
The fraught question of what history is and who gets to write it is one of the reasons so many of the stories within Black convicts remain relegated to the margins, silenced within Western histories of the colonial period. As I combed through the archives over the past 6 years, I became more and more amazed as the stories of people transported to Australia from Barbados, the United States, Mozambique, Canada, Jamaica, Martinique, St. Kitts and Nevis, Britain, South Africa, Grenada, Antigua, and so many other countries began to reveal themselves. Despite the fragmentary nature of the evidence, I've attempted to piece together parts of these narratives. But the joy of discovery has also been met with frustration, and on several occasions, anger. Why don't we know about these men, women, and children? They are literally recorded, often in ways that highlight their race, making it impossible to ignore. But ignored they have been. Archives aren't neutral. As historian Jennifer L. Morgan puts it, for many scholars, the problem is not to weed through an overabundance of sources, but to endure the absences, erasures, and mischaracterizations of racialized subjects. Engagement with the archive is an opportunity to confront the exclusionary powers that position racialized subjects as outside the national project. The archive, then, is home to the counter-narrative, or at least to its possibility. So, I found it. The colonial archives have presented me with opportunities to better understand this settler colony known as Australia. But working with archives takes a toll, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Archives are representations of state violence and power, and this becomes most clear when working with material that details the exploitation of human labor for profit. Reading between the lines of this material, it becomes difficult to comprehend how humans can subject other humans to so much cruelty. Considering tragedy after tragedy, with the awareness that so many of these ancestors were denied access to justice in their lifetimes, gives my work a sense of urgency. The archives themselves enact an ongoing violence because, as Marissa Fuentes puts it, we can only create historical narratives that reproduce these violent, colonial discourses. Moreover, these narratives have been produced by predominantly white people about non-white historical actors. As a Black woman, as well as an historian, I felt the added awareness that my work might go beyond just writing history and act as a partial corrective to the epistemic violence of these narratives, helping us to see these people as more than commodities and convicts.
Wow, a round of applause. Stella Chingape. What a stunning work, and we'll kick off each of our short discussions on the shortlisted books with the judge's report, so please allow me to share that with you. Black Convicts, How Slavery Shaped Australia is that rarest of works, a book that changes how the reader understands history as they read. Chingape reintegrates the colonial archives and identifies close to 500 people of African descent who were transported from across the empire to Australia as convicts. As far as the archive allows, she follows the experiences on this continent and demonstrates the impact they had on the colony. She then goes further and places the transportation of convicts in the context of a much broader arc of history: European imperialism, the transatlantic slave trade, and the exploitation of labour in the pursuit of profit. She specifically demonstrates the links between the convict system and plantation slavery, including through systems of punishment, degradation, and surveillance. The work has implications for the way the United Kingdom and United States understand their own histories of racism, slavery, and transportation. Black Convicts represents a substantial intervention in our understanding of the convict archive and offers a new understanding of Australia's participation in slavery since colonisation. That those words from the judges indicate that this can be a bit of a challenging read for some, I think. There was certainly parts about this book that I found challenging because it reminded me of when folks say, I never learned that at school, as if we stop learning when we finish school. And Elizabeth, we were talking earlier today about, I sort of remarked that this is the kind of book we need in the Year 12 syllabus. It really is vital.
I think that there's a feeling across all the shortlisted authors, actually, that these should all be prescribed reading for young people. But books like this in particular, because we've all experienced a particular type of schooling and a particular type of history teaching in schooling, and this to me is in this day and age when so much information is available, and you would think that archives have been interrogated as far as they can be by now, and yet here Scintilla is wanting to go back into that archive and just uncovering this hidden history, this incredibly important hidden history.
The amount of research that she's clearly done to produce the final work of the book is really extraordinary and so impressive. I mean, there are many authors and historians that would admire the final product of this book. And yeah, there are things that come up that do challenge us around what we have learned or what we believe our history to be. And I think those challenges are really important.
It also really lays out sort of the history of immigration policy in this country, in this colony, and the legalised racism as well. That was a product of successive government policy.
And how it persists through systems to today. And I think when we were talking about the need for as many people as possible to read a book like this, to understand the depths of our history as a country, it gives us an opportunity to reflect personally, but also on the systems that we interact with, our workplaces, the health system, whatever it might be, and the racism that some folks experience, and where that's come from. That much of it, we can learn much about that from a book like this.
Yeah, it's got quite a sort of sweeping context across it, this book. And, it's a deep learning experience reading this book. And similarly to another book we're going to discuss soon, there's sort of parallels there about the history of this country. And when an author really sort of, grapples with it and dives in and just, it's sort of one reveal after another experience when you're reading this book.
It really is, yeah. So if you haven't read it, our good folks out the front are selling it. But
exactly.
It really is, as I said, vital. And if you haven't, I hope you do engage with it.
Could we have a round of applause for the author, Scintilla Chingape? Okay, let's move on to our next shortlisted author. So we're going to be talking about translations by Jemana Abdu, and we might hit it with a short video about this book.
They became uncitizens. Alia ran the idea over and over in her mind, all down the highway, splitting the bush either side of her like an emerald sea. She thought it in the prophetic sense, to frame it as a future so certain it was as though it had already happened. Her daughter Sakina slept soundly in the passenger seat, dressed in blue like a robin's egg. Alia practiced the belief until it became scriptural. They became uncitizens. They got out and away. There would be no roadblock. Some women are difficult to belittle. Alia Asfour counted herself among these echelons because she was in the habit of taking herself seriously. Across the years, disaster after disaster had sounded sirens through her life, like a city wailing evacuation. After hearing those blares all alone, At last, she had taken heed. She had draped the night around an escape. Now, the steering wheel warmed to her palms. The accelerator sighed under her boot, and her headlights slid into the blackness of a future she concentrated hard on, like an idea she might forget upon waking. She was done with the rabble, really, this time. Her daughter Sakina, and only Sakina, would be an exception to the rule. And the rule, God willing, was that they would be the only two people they needed in order to survive. Alia had arrived at the understanding that, beyond reliance on the divine, all forms of dependency were at best a risk, and at worst, a waste of her precious time. Her phone trilled in the cup holder. She fumbled in the dark to answer it so as not to disturb Sakina. Her ex-husband burst onto the line with a demand for a location. "Assalamu alaikum, Adam," she said dryly. Adam stuttered and babbled, groping as ever at her receding image from a place more like boy panic than despotism. She pinned her mobile to the shoulder furthest from Sakina. In the days of their marriage, Adam Rifai had been a generous man. That his generosity may have been a byproduct of his versatile and all-encompassing vanity did not discount it, so Alia did her best to repay him with a generosity of a kind. He was saying, "You just do what you want. It's not safe." "Why isn't it safe?" she asked, to humor him. "You should be around people in case something happens, people who can look after you." "Like who?" she asked, and thought immediately that it should be like whom, and after that she considered his hypocrisy. He must have caught her old patronizing inflection, because he spun in a moment from alarm to vexation. Those quick moods of his had only surfaced in the later years of their marriage, after a disaster so unnatural to his charmed existence. A disaster Alia remembered as a little blue shock coming into the world in the same state as it had left. Wrapped in a cloth the size of a tea towel, lowered into a hole as small as a dog might dig for an old pair of shoes.
Wow, a big round of applause for the author. That was, I love these readings by these stunning actors.
Yeah, they're beautifully produced as well. So the second book that we're discussing on our shortlist is Translations by Jemana Abdu, and this is what the judges had to say about this novel. Jemana Abdu's glistening debut novel, Translations, challenges every assumption a reader may hold. Set in rural New South Wales, Abdu sidesteps every stereotype expected of the Australian bush narrative and instead leans into the complexities of friendship, love, faith and family. Across the years, disaster after disaster had sounded sirens through her life like a city wailing evacuation. Abdu writes Aliyah, who we follow as she moves with her young daughter to a rural town and attempts to build literally a new life on the land as far as possible from her previous experience as a well-kept married woman. Abdu picks at the tensions between trauma and isolation, faith and community, and what it means to make a home as a migrant on stolen land. Independent, Muslim, devout and possibly queer, Aliyah is a new type of protagonist in Australian literature. Translations is a joy to read. Now, this book, as the judges touched on, every element of it defies stereotype and defies expectation, and including the possible queerness of our chief protagonist, because it's never sort of quite resolved, and it doesn't need to be, does it? So this to me is a book that is about people who never really fit into a mainstream context or a dominant culture context, and they are a group of people who are not quite fitting in. They're gravitating toward making their own community. and they're learning to live and to love and to navigate each other. And the home that Aaliyah and her daughter have made with their farmland, their farmhand Shep, and friend Hannah, is something of a pressure cooker environment. So Jemana really turns the tension up in this novel. How did you feel about the constant tension throughout?
I liked that there was tension in this book because, you know, again, talking about being challenged as a reader when you're engaging with something. And I really reflected on the tensions in relationships between the characters and the parallel between the river, the storm, the bushfire. And I really love the way that came through in the story. But yeah, it makes you reflect on your own communities that we're part of, the small communities and the big communities. What does it mean to be part of a community and bring your full self when you're dealing with other things in your life that can be quite tumultuous and quite, you know, big things that we deal with a childhood friend or, you know, an ex-partner and things like that. So, but yeah, that parallel or that bringing together of what happens in relationships with those natural forces like the fire, the storm. I really love that.
Because there is also in this book a feeling of violence just around the corner everywhere. So there's the violence of characters who have grown up in a slaughterhouse abattoir environment. There's familial violence, there's sibling on sibling violence, and there's also the violence of the bushfires and the elements surrounding, which further adds to sort of the pressure cooker environment of the whole novel. And the other aspect of this novel that I absolutely loved was the honesty that sort of happens at the end, where characters are actually really having authentic conversations with each other, when initially a lot of the novel is about sort of saving face and you know, presenting a particular front, and towards the end it sort of climaxes in these really honest moments that are incredibly moving. That she pulls off beautifully.
I think it's important to. This is the author's debut. Am I right? This is, and also just the other part of her life is that she's a doctor. When I read that, I thought, my goodness, the ways in which people can produce such extraordinary pieces of literature whilst having a whole nother life as a doctor and a woman, you know, in the world in 2025. It's worthy of a mention. I thought I was struck.
Well, I mean, so many Australian writers have to have another job because writing don't pay those bills. So,
unfortunately.
So well done to, you know, every novelist who has to have a day job. But I wanted to also, let's just put our hands together for Jemana Abdu's translation.
Absolutely.
Making it to the shortlist.
So it's my pleasure to keep announcing the top 6 shortlisted, and I'm delighted to announce that the next book we're going to talk about is Theory and Practice by Michelle de Kretser. So a big congratulations to Michelle, who's an amazing author, an amazing writer. Let's look
At
to
the
the
start
screen.
of 1986, I moved from Sydney to Melbourne. I was 24. The first thing I did in Melbourne was buy a vintage dress. The dress was made of lace and had cap sleeves, an empire waist, and a fitted knee-length skirt. It dated from the early 60s, when thousands of its kind must have been made. Now fashion had plucked it from oblivion and filled it with warm young bodies again. Powder blue and rose and coffee cream variants existed, but my dress was intellectual black. A university in Melbourne had given me money to undertake an MA in English. I turned up on campus to enroll and found 2 undergrads ahead of me in the queue. Be the one to break up, one of them was urging her friend. Be the one. Be the cool one. The third important thing I did that week was sign a lease on a flat in St Kilda. a rundown one-bedder at the rear of a Victorian house. Since arriving in Melbourne, I'd been staying with Lenny, a friend of Sydney friends. Lenny had a lectureship in art history, and he lived in St Kilda in a flat overlooking the bay. He was a Marxist, like all the young men I knew back then. They were always going on about late capitalism, and I admired their confidence. I mean, how could they be sure that we weren't stuck in about a third of the way through capitalism, or still just revving up capitalism? The women I knew described themselves as feminists, and so did I. In theory, there was no reason not to be a Marxist feminist, but it was tricky in practice because Marxism in student politics was dominated by men. While trusting in feminism's transformative power, I retained a stubborn, dazed belief in love. All through my undergraduate years in Sydney, I'd valued it as a transcendent ideal. Then I read a letter that I wasn't meant to read. It was addressed to the man I believed loved me. And it was plain that his affair with the letter writer had been going on for months. She was a smart, good-looking, outspoken feminist in our circle. Her name was Lois. Yes, really. Did she call him Superman in bed? That was one of the enraged, feeble, anguished things I howled at the man. I went to a park beside the harbour and lay on the grass. I told myself, remember this. Learn from this. Pineapple syrup light dripped on everything and sweetened everything except my thoughts. The unpolluted blue overhead was interrupted only by a casuarina's smoky green.
Let's go to the judge's report. Michelle de Kretz's theory and practice opens on the image of an Australian geologist hiking in the Swiss Alps, yet soon takes a swerve, interrupted by the writer herself, or a version of the writer herself, as she realises that she no longer wants to write novels that read like novels. Instead of shapeliness and disguise, I wanted a form that allowed for formlessness and mess. It occurred to me that one way to find that form might be to tell the truth. Theory and practice is such an attempt, and true to form, or perhaps formlessness, de Kretz's mess is no ordinary mess, but rather, instead, a brilliantly autofictive knot, composed of the shifting intensities and treacheries of young love, of complex inheritances, both literary and maternal, of overwhelming jealousies and dark shivers of shame. Set in 1986 in St Kilda, the narrator is a young graduate student researching Virginia Woolf and sorting through the messy gap between theory and practice as the ever-compelling capital T theory sinks its teeth into the Melbourne set. In her refusal to write a novel that reads like a novel, de Kretzer instead gifts her reader a sharp examination of the complex pleasures and costs of living. Boy, I was only 8 years old in 1986. So I remember what life was like for me then, and I also know St Kilda. And this book is such a book of its time and place, and that I really loved that as I was going through it. And the way it is a novel, not like a novel, I found myself picking it up and putting it down. I read it in a different way than I might read a traditional novel. And I really was struck by, I loved engaging and imagining these characters, thinking about myself as a 24-year-old person too, the theory and the practice of trying to figure out life as a young person. And I came to Melbourne a bit as a younger person than that, but I remember going and buying vintage clothing in Melbourne. It was so exciting. I just loved so many parts of this book that enabled some self-reflection as a woman and thinking about life as a young woman. But also, Elizabeth, there's so much about inequality and heartbreak and
jealousy.
My gosh, the tough stuff.
Yeah, the tough stuff.
Yeah.
It's often quite confronting, this novel, because, well, it's hard to define. So as a reader, you're ploughing through it thinking, what is it? Is it sort of memoir? Is it fiction? Is it sort of, academic purge? It's quite a thrill of a book.
I think so
let's
too.
face it. And yeah, the jealousy that is depicted is also really confronting. So you sort of have this love triangle between the main protagonist, her friend / romantic rival, and the pretty average dude in between them.
Yeah.
So it's sort of horrifying to read these parts of these sort of jealousies that we can often all have, particularly where romance is concerned.
Yeah.
And, part of me really wanted to shake that young protagonist at various times and just, or wanted her to suffer some sort of defeat in her pursuit of this man behind her friend's back. I thought that was really hard to grapple with.
It was.
But very real and true.
Yeah.
And I mean, the book oozes Melbourne, doesn't it? In
does.
a very sort of Helen Garner way. And I'm sure that Michelle de Kretser is absolutely sick of being compared to Helen Garner with this particular novel. And if you're in the audience, you're welcome to come and, throttle me backstage for saying it yet again. But it is a very Garner-esque sort of atmosphere and that sort of thing about... walking around the streets of a particular inner city suburb and, getting on a bike or, knocking on someone's door, like those sort of simple everyday sort of minutiae of life in an inner city is very beautifully depicted in this novel.
And I understand that comparison as well when you're engaging with such an amazing book about your town, about your city, but there's an undeniable de Kretser stamp on this story, and I just loved that. And I think I went in between that sort of those frustrations you have when you're reading, when you're like, what is this? Are we doing this or are we doing that? And then there was other times where I just let that go and just... and I like the way that I was able to just let it go and go, just keep reading.
Yeah, because it's disorientating, isn't it?
It is a bit,
They're kind of like little disorientating grenades where suddenly we're in an academic headspace in particular parts of the novel and it's sort of like, oh, now we're exploring the difference between theory and practice. And so it sort of melds that, that sort of depiction of... academic life, student life, bohemian life, and sort of the untethered, community that she's in Melbourne.
Yeah. I think finally as well, one of the reasons I really enjoyed it is, I work in a university and I've been in the higher ed sector for sort of 16 or more years, and I'm constantly engaging with students, with academics, with thinkers and writers and, young people as well. And I think that was just an added icing on the cake part of my life of why I enjoyed this book so much.
Of your particular response.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's put our hands together for Michelle de
de Kretser, yeah, congratulations.
Okay.
All right, Elizabeth, over to you.
Yeah, so the next book that has made the Stella 2025 shortlist is The Burrow by Melanie Cheng. So please put your hands together. And we'll show a short video about it.
He looked different from the photos. When she looked at him from the side, he didn't even really look like a rabbit, more like some hurried craft project. A couple of tan-coloured pom-poms with 2 oversized black beads for eyes. Where were his whiskers and his nose? He seemed unfinished, like Ruby when she'd first come home. Fleshy and lumpy and unformed. But that hadn't stopped the adults from saying how much she looked like great auntie so-and-so and how she'd inherited the Lee mouth. Lucy didn't get it. She thought Ruby, in all her doughy formlessness, somehow resembled everybody and nobody at all. When he had arrived with the rabbit, Lucy's dad had placed the cardboard box on its side on a small patch of grass in their backyard. Lucy had flopped down belly first, with her head propped up on her hands. "Open it, Dad!" The lid had come away to reveal a huddled ball of blonde fur in a tangle of yellow hay. Lucy felt her mother crouch beside her and rest a cool hand on her shoulder. "Don't rush him." They waited, barely breathing until he ventured out of his cardboard cave. Lucy watched with silent delight as he took hesitant strides across the grass. Until then, she hadn't known a bunny's nose was constantly twitching, as relentless and tireless as a pulse. "Rabbits are prey animals," her mum said as they watched him. "They're not like cats and dogs." As Lucy observed her unnamed pet, she imagined an owl nose-diving from a nearby tree and whisking the bunny away in its leathery talons. She shook her head to rid herself of the image. Twitching limbs, cloudy eyes, matted metallic-smelling fur. The family had decided that during the day, when they were home, the rabbit would be free to roam the fenced backyard. But at night, when the cats were prowling and birds of prey were hunting, he would be much safer inside the hutch. It was a 2-story structure with an upstairs bedroom and a play area on the ground floor. After a couple of arguments, the family had agreed on a location in the left corner of the backyard, beside the water tank and in front of the shed. For weeks, Lucy had imagined a mini lop bouncing through the chipboard arches and scaling the timber ramp. But that first evening, much to her disappointment, the rabbit had refused to enter his new home. Instead, he'd spent the night in the vandalised cardboard box, which had been placed on the floor of Lucy's room. The rabbit was always watching, always listening. He was completely in tune with his environment. These were all the things that Lucy's softly spoken psychologist had told her to do in order to relax. Only the rabbit didn't look calm. Not at all. Perhaps Lucy contemplated relaxation was just for predators.
Wow.
So the judge's report for Melanie Cheng's The Burrow says that Cheng's book is among those wonderful creations that continue their careful work long after the final page has been turned. Here, the power of Cheng's craft is found in a restraint that feels almost deceptive and certainly later reveals an artful layering. This is the story of Amy and Jin Lee, their preteen daughter Lucy and Amy's mother Pauline. Pauline had a stroke while watching the couple's second child Ruby in a bath. That Ruby drowned was not Pauline's fault, but the shame and grief has done its dirty work, and not Pauline. And they are all disconnected from each other. This family. The pandemic strikes, and we all know how that turned out. Set during the COVID-19 pandemic, Cheng avoids the obvious isolation metaphors and instead invites the reader into a psychological study of an adopted pet rabbit, Fiver. Riffing on Kafka's short story of the same name about a burrowing creature desperate to reinforce its subterranean labyrinth against all manner of terrors, The Burrow recreates a feeling of false security in its pages. It is not until days after finishing Cheng's work that you realise, with panic, that you've been afraid the whole time. Now, this is another novel that is very, very Melbourne. It is also very, very lockdown, so it feels like tonight it's the right place to be here in Melbourne discussing this particular novel, at least. The novel's tone is so disciplined and so quiet and even-paced, and that tone and that pace, to me, really contrasts beautifully with all these suppressed emotions that need to be shared and need to be expressed, because the kind of grief that these characters are experiencing is a particular kind of grief, and it's a particular kind of grief you would not wish upon anyone. It's the most awful types of grief, really. And I think Cheng so beautifully sort of unravels that grief
Yeah,
in this
yeah.
very sort of deceptive and quiet fashion. What did you think about it?
That
Inala?
word quiet, I really felt that when I was reading it too, that there was a quietness to it. And of course, I was recalling what it was like during COVID lockdowns while I was reading it. And I think I also was reflecting on what different people need in different times of challenge and trauma and lockdown just being one example. What we need, we sometimes think that's what everyone else needs, and that may not be it, especially things around space and comfort. I really was reflecting a bit on that during the book too. But yeah, that steady and quiet way that the story is told, it brought back a lot for me about what lockdowns were like. And you know, the trauma that this family goes through is you wouldn't wish that on anyone. But
No, and I think that because I've read a few novels now that sort of mention the pandemic, but because Melbourne had a particularly pretty much unique experience in terms of lockdown after lockdown, I think that Melanie does this depiction incredibly well. And so with this kind of quiet tone and this very disciplined pace into all this, she drops a rabbit.
Yeah.
And read the book and find out what happens once a rabbit enters the scene.
Yeah, that's it. And with the rabbit, when I think of a rabbit, I think of, soft and vulnerable and something that we want to, cuddle and pet. And there's a sentence early in the book that says, the rabbit didn't like being touched. And knowing that this is written during those pandemic lockdowns, that made me think of all sorts of things about young people and their experience of the lockdown. And then all of a sudden they've got to go to kindergarten and sit on the mat. And all of a sudden they've got to be out in the big wide world. And there were a few parts through the novel that made me think of that vulnerability and the softness.
But also the whole
kids.
family doesn't want to be touched by each other and by their grief. They're resisting, how grief can touch you. So it's quite an achievement, and let's put our hands together for Melanie Cheng.
Absolutely. Okay, folks, I'm particularly proud and excited to be announcing the 5th shortlisted book for this year, which is Black Witness by Amy Maguire. Big round of applause for Amy, and let's go to the screen.
When I began my career in black media, there was an expectation that this was just the beginning, not the end. Black media was to be a training ground, or a launching pad into mainstream media. Some prominent journalists have spoken of their aspirations not to be pigeonholed into Aboriginal affairs, not to just be confined to reporting on black affairs because they are black. It's an entirely understandable aspiration if you want to be a journalist, and yet it wasn't something I ever considered. I think it comes down to why you want to be in the media in the first place. A voice in the media is undeniably powerful. Journalists often do not have a field of expertise outside journalism, and yet we are given the opportunity to speak to the public and frame public debates in ways that other professions cannot. Being in black media means not only understanding that power, but understanding black power, the power you hold and the power our communities hold. The essays and stories I have presented in this collection all say something about the promise of black media being not a holding place, but one instead of freedom. Black media is on the margins. It is underfunded and undervalued, and you must go to greater lengths to get your story's attention. And yet it provides a space of possibility. In fact, it is the mainstream media that confines us. As Gomeroi writer Jared Field once wrote on Indigenous X, I promise that the margins are not so bad. There's freedom here. As I wrote these essays and reflected on my past journalism, I began realizing just how much black media has allowed me to find my own voice. When I wrote for mainstream media, I always had a niggling reminder in the back of my head that I was writing for a white audience.
for an audience that required me to compromise my words and my fire. But when I write for black media, there is none of that there. The heat does not have to be turned down. The fire can be stoked. It is stoked by elevating the voices of black witnesses, by honouring their experiences, and by listening deeply to their interpretations, to their theorising, to their own knowledges. When black witnesses are in mainstream media, we are often asked questions that deny this very power, the power to define our own reality. The questions are always tailored to the whims of those in power, those who have had the power to determine our futures through harmful and violent representations. In black media, we don't have to answer those questions. We write our own. One of the most important lessons I've learnt in journalism is the power of the right question. Because without the right question, you will never find the answer.
Congratulations to Amy Maguire. Let's hear the judge's report. Amy Maguire eviscerates the approach of mainstream journalism in Australia in Black Witness, The Power of Indigenous Media. Writing from her experience as a Durrumbal and South Sea Islander journalist, Maguire argues that too often journalists and media outlets privilege the white witness, marginalising anyone who does not conform to that preferred stereotype, especially First Nations peoples. Black Witness takes the reader back to pivotal moments in recent Australian history, including the Palm Island Uprising and the Bowraville murders, and demonstrates the bias and injustice implicit in much contemporary media coverage. The collection also honours the sheer courage and deep resilience of black witnesses. Maguire notes that a voice in the media is undeniably powerful. With rigorous research, she ensures that Black Witness is also a deeply powerful collection. Maguire's debut non-fiction is a must-read for all engaged citizens, especially journalists who want to represent the fullness of contemporary Australia. When I first picked up Black Witness, the book's separated into two parts, White Witness and Black Witness, and it's a really powerful critique of mainstream media, the boldness with which Maguire goes in on the ABC around specific pieces of coverage is really solid and really to be admired. The Black Witness is the one who is labelled as untrustworthy, as angry, as overly emotional, and hence the white witness is the person that should be trusted and believed. And that's something that really comes through in this book. I was really struck as well on a personal level. There's parts of the book that reference the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody and other really big issues that we as a country have had to face.
And have never really addressed properly.
Indeed,
the
including the
outcome of that
intervention.
commission.
The Northern Territory intervention.
Yes.
We were just talking about this
Yeah.
earlier.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you obviously have, you were telling me earlier that you have a connection to the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody as well.
Yeah, my dad and my uncle were both involved as commissioners, and that was a time when I was a young person, a teenager. You're trying to work out what your ethics and your morals are, your politics, and trying to work out what your parents and people do for a job. And recalling that time when the report was handed down and the media coverage, even as far back as the days of when Hawke was Prime Minister, the racism and the lack of rigour around a lot of coverage when it comes to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander matters. Maguire just goes in. She's so staunch, and again, that word solid with how she interrogates it.
And also, I think a lot of us are under a misconception that in this day and age, responsible media will do a good job, and she just really tears that apart for the fallacy that it is. And she does not resile at all from calling out her peers and colleagues. This is an incredibly risky book. and, you know, its fearlessness and its depth of reporting and its painstaking regard for facts versus fiction is incredibly important. And I feel like every single media student, journalism student, anyone who works at all in communications should read this book.
Yeah. We also were talking earlier about the power that exists among media and certain modes and channels of media, and that sometimes that power becomes out of control, and that's something that I think Amy really reins in and makes accountable her peers across the industry, and good on her for doing it.
I think it's, hopefully this book becomes, you know, something of a classic, you know, that people will still talk about many years to come, as with all the shortlisted books. But this book is so interrogative of what's gone on in media in the last sort of 15 to 20 to 30 years in particular, that it's just deeply moving, and it's a real reckoning.
Yeah, and I think finally the importance of black media and in our context here in Australia of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander media, it can't be denied any longer. The way that that we as Indigenous people tell stories and find the truth, it's a necessity that's been placed upon us to find and reveal the truth. And Amy is just leading the way with that. So good on her.
Hugely impressive.
Big round of applause for Amy Maguire.
Okay, so now we're on to the very last of the shortlisted books that make up the 6 in the final shortlist for Stella. Well, there is only one shortlist actually. And so I'd love you to please put your hands together for this next book. It is by Samar Sabawi, and it's called Cactus Pear for My Beloved.
I park my father's old Camry in the last remaining disabled spot outside the Logan shopping centre. I switch off the tired engine and it squeals with gratitude before it slumps into silence. Baba, I nudge him. He does not respond. He sits in the passenger seat like a mountain, ancient like eternity, fragile like a poem. His dark, round face, a rugged terrain of countless tear tracks and glorious laugh lines. His brown eyes hold 1,001 stories in a glance. His lips move to the rhythm of a verse that he whispers like a sacred poem. He's somewhere else. He is always somewhere else. And it is in this constant state of absence that makes his presence more splendid. I know better than to rush him. I wait. Heat replaces the cool air inside the car. My skin burns under the relentless rays of a blazing Australian sun beaming through the windscreen. I don't call it the Sunshine State for nothing, I mumble as I slather on another layer of sunscreen. Only seconds have passed, but already the air grows thick and humid. Sweat beads fill the grooves on Bubba's cheeks. His red golf t-shirt clings to his belly, damp with perspiration. It's hot in here, Bubba, I say, as I dust off the dandruff sprinkled on his shoulders and adjust his black sun cap. Yalla, Habibi, I beg. He turns his head, exasperated. It takes a few seconds for his eyes to focus, as if he's dragging himself away from a distant world. But he gets here. And when he does, and in true Bubba fashion, he snaps into character. First, he declares with a theatrical voice, fetch me my trusty steed. He points out the window to the line of shopping carts nearby. Pick a solid one that I can charge into the battlefield with. A shopping trolley? Yes. But Bubba, I wipe the melted makeup off my face. Your walker is a much better steed. The physiotherapist said you should, he rolls his eyes, but I push on. You should always use your walker. It gives you the support you need. I'll get it for you. It's in the boot. Well, it can stay there, he insists. A walker? Do you want my friends to think I'm an old man? He fakes outrage with a mischievous smile, and it is in that instant that I see him. I see him. The wounded fighter who drank the sorrow of loss and bled his pain into captivating verses. the wanderer who traversed every corner of the world searching for a home, the hungry Palestinian refugee who swallowed the Arabian desert and landed on Australia's shores. I see him, poet, revolutionary, entrepreneur, Aussie sheep farmer, and now aged pensioner. Him. I see all of him, my Baba. And my heart, like my makeup, melts. I capitulate. In my 50s, I've become much more understanding of the need to hide the appearance of old age, even at the expense of comfort. Vanity, like poetry, runs in the family.
So the judge's report for Cactus Pear for My Beloved says the root of memoir is the Proto-Indo-European mere meaning to remember. Samar Sabawi's latest book, Cactus Pear for My Beloved, swells larger than the bounds of individual memory. With glorious sweeping scope and a light, elegant touch, Cactus Pear is a family story come national archive, a love story for the ages, a poet's remarkable journey, a profound act of resistance. Sabawi begins with her father in contemporary Queensland, then leaps back in time to his father and his father before that, charting the life of Palestinians through her lineage and under successive empires, Ottoman, British, the 1948 Nakba and life after. It is life that Sabawi so vividly portrays, a fierce, poetic, dual, family, beach trips, cinnamon tea, school. History, particularly in this region in the world, is often told in dry, impersonal reports. Here, Sabawi animates these epoch moments in stunning, intimate detail. Spare, gracious prose delivers Gaza not as a barren battlefield, but a people, proud and human and persisting. How does love triumph over a wall? A character asks Summer's father. Stories like this surely form part of the answer. Inala and I don't feel we can talk about this book tonight without mentioning that just when you thought a genocide couldn't get any worse, it actually is, and a program of ethnic cleansing can't get any worse than it is right now, getting so much worse for the Palestinian people, and we urge everyone to take whatever action you can to object to what's going on. This is an incredibly powerful book for a particular time to appear before us. It is a beautiful rendition, a beautiful piece of literature about intergenerational impacts of war and displacement of Palestinians across 100 years.
It is, and as you say, Elizabeth, this is such an important book for our time now, in a way that is different from the comments I made earlier about Michelle de Kretz's being a book of a time and a place in the 80s of St Kilda. This is a book that we need for this time and this place, I think. I really appreciated the personal in this book that directly relates to bigger, wider, contexts. I mean, what a generous way to share. There's photos and of family and documents and all woven in through the pages of the stories, and I just appreciated that so much. That personal, especially with what's been happening.
And it's a personal testimony as well as a family testimony and a piece of, I guess, archival history. She's, I mean, I think she did something like 60 hours of interviews. She did 4 years of research to put this book together. There's also so much humour and love and playfulness in this book. The family are very loving and playful and dramatic, and and you just get a real sense of where they've come from and why they left.
Yeah, I read about, I think it was in one of the reviews of the book that I read about what it means to peel a cactus pear for your loved one, to literally peel it for them, and that is such an expression of love. And I think those expressions come throughout the book. And also, I reflected on place and what it means to be connected to a place, and this amazing optimism, the strength that can come despite challenges of the depths of challenges that displacement brings. That the need to carry on, and how love and other emotions can ensure that we carry on.
And also how the incredibly important place of art and literature, because her father is a poet.
Yeah.
And so, he's immersed in this sort of arts community, and he's hailed as, like he's in a place where poets are actually known. They're not sort of, marginalised. They're actually known, that they have a particular stature in the community and in the nation. So,
and there is some beautiful poetry in the book. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is Sama Sabawi's Cactus Pear for My Beloved. If you'd please put your hands together for that one as well. And that's it. And so that's it from us for tonight. We hope you enjoyed this discussion about the Stella Prize shortlist. Congratulations to Fiona and Claudia at the Stella Prize for working so hard to make tonight happen, and to make indeed the Stella Prize happen at all, and all the donors to the Stella Prize who make it possible for writers to be awarded money for writing.
Absolutely. Thank you also to the tech crew, to the State Library and the Wheeler Centre in the beautiful room that we're here tonight. And to all of you, thank you for being here and for continuing to read books by women and non-binary authors. And please join us for a drink afterwards, and you can purchase some of the books out the front as well.
The paperback bookshop is up there selling books.
Yeah. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Inala.
Let's get a drink, shall we?